Think of your guitar like a person. It has a head, a neck, and a body. Knowing all the parts of your acoustic guitar sets a solid foundation in your guitar journey, so that way when someone mentions the word fret or bridge, you know exactly what they're talking about. So we're gonna go ahead and start out with the head of the guitar, also known as the head stock. And if you notice, there are 6 knobs here on the head, and these are called tuning knobs or tuners, and depending on the direction that you turn them, it raises or lowers the pitch of each individual string. The next thing that we have here are these little machine heads, and if you take a closer look, you'll actually notice that each string is thread through each machine head, and they are coiled around, so when you turn your tuning knob, depending on the direction, it's going to move the machine head in that direction, and that is what helps you raise or lower the pitch of whatever string you're tuning. Now moving down to where the head meets the neck of the guitar, we have a little strip called the nut, and if you take a closer look, you'll notice that each string is actually in its own little lane, and basically the nut's job is to keep the strings from just interacting with each other, so that way they just stay in their own lane. You know, it's saying stay in your lane. Now the entire part of the neck, starting right under the nut to the sound hole that we have here, this is our fingerboard, also known as the fretboard. Usually it's most commonly referred to as the fretboard. I say fretboard. And this is where your fingers are gonna go when you're building chords, when you're playing notes. Now, even more importantly about the fretboard is that we have what are called frets. And this is so crucial to know because when someone mentions the 3rd fret or the 5th fret, you know exactly where to place your fingers. The frets are the silver lines that occur throughout the fretboard, and basically what it does is it boxes off these territories here. So you have your 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, so on. Take an even closer look at your fretboard and notice if you have any shapes across your fretboard. Do you have some dots, birds? Every guitar has something different. This is actually a horrible example of that because I don't have any fret markers except for the 12th fret over here. But what you probably do have, just like me, is if you tip your guitar to the top facing part of the neck, you'll notice that there are actually dots that go along the 3rd fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 9th fret, 12th fret, 15th, and 17th frets. And if your guitar has a lot more frets than that, then there might be some additional dots. But the 12th fret usually has a double dot, and it tells you that it's the 12th fret. And basically you can think of the fret markers as a map on your fretboard, so that way you know exactly where you are, because especially if you're playing a lot of like lead based stuff or, you know, bar chords all along the fretboard and you're kind of just moving some weird and different shapes around, think of it like Google Maps for your guitar, because without Google Maps, a lot of us would get really lost. Now moving on down the body here, we already covered the sound hole. This is obviously where the sound comes out of your guitar because it is an acoustic guitar, which it's also an acoustic electric. I'll explain in a moment here. But unplugged, this is where your sound comes out. Basically, the way that it works is think of being in an empty apartment when you first move in. There's no furniture in there. There's nothing to really muffle the sound, so it's very echoey. That's basically what your acoustic guitar is like, an empty apartment. Now, I haven't actually covered this piece already, but we should just go ahead and cover it anyways, even though you might already know what they are, but these are all the strings here. Most guitars have 6. There's some that have 7, 8, 9. There's guitars that have 12. I have a 12-string guitar, but most have 6. But now down below here where the strings finally come to an end, this part right here is called the bridge. The bridge is where your strings actually lock in, and so most guitars have what is called a pinned bridge. So these little knobs that you see down here at the bottom, these are your bridge pins, and they can be quite annoying at times because when you're changing your strings, we won't get into that today. Basically, what the pin's job is to do is once you put your string through the little hole in the bridge, you put the pin on top and it locks each string into place. Now on top of the bridge, this little ivory piece right here where the strings are actually on top of is called the saddle. And what the saddle does is it actually gives height to your strings. There's this term called action. Okay, when we hear the word action, we think of like running, we think of motion. Action on a guitar talks about the distance of your strings to the fretboard. Your saddle is allowing your strings to have some distance from the fretboard to be pressed down on, because you're gonna be pressing down on your strings when you play them. So the higher up your strings are from the fretboard, it means that you have higher action. Not good for beginners. What is great for a beginner is what is called low action. Lower action, meaning the closer your strings are to the fretboard, the easier it is going to be to press down on them, which is why it is so important for beginner guitarists to find a lower action guitar, because your fingers do hurt at first when you start playing guitar, and the less resistance that you have to work against is better. As a beginner, low action is what you want to go for. Now, if you were handed down a guitar and you didn't get to pick your guitar, and you're trying to learn on it and it is just difficult to press down on the strings because you have super high action and maybe the guitar has just been like sitting in a corner for years collecting dust, you can take your guitar into a technician. The saddle is what controls the action of your guitar. So when you take it in and you need your action to be lowered, they're gonna take that saddle and they're gonna either sand it down or change it out with a different saddle that is lower, and thus giving you lower action. You may actually notice that when you change your strings, the saddle can easily be pulled out, and that is why. Now, some honorable mentions to your acoustic guitar here are the strap buttons. So this is where you're gonna take your guitar strap and you are going to just go ahead and you are just going to lock it into place here on both ends. You don't really need a strap though if you're sitting, but if you're standing, highly recommended, because you don't want to drop your guitar and it will be much easier to play standing if you have a strap. Bonus parts here, if you have an electric acoustic guitar, this means that you can plug your guitar in and jam at a coffee shop or an open mic night or on stage. You're gonna have this little panel here. Each guitar is different. This is a pickup by Fishman. They're pretty popular. This is just kind of like a basic one here where it has a tuner that's built in, which is really cool. Some of them have actual tone controls and stuff, which is really cool. So some of them are more elaborate than others. This is more like a simple one. And then your input is actually, the input is right here in the strap button. So sometimes there will be like a separate input, kind of like an electric guitar. This one's just right where your strap goes, which is kind of like extra security for your guitar strap, which is nice. And then also this piece right here is where you're gonna put your 9-volt battery. This is going to power your whole pickup set here on your guitar. And that's how that works. So those are all of the parts of the acoustic guitar. Now stay tuned, because in the next video, I'm gonna show you how to tune your guitar. Hope my pun didn't go unnoticed there.